For our second discussion on daily life in the 1840s in Bogota, Colombia, we will address one of the fundamental determinants of health and wellness in urban area. Many of our modern assumptions assume that people in earlier eras lived in sloth and ignorance until the advent of more modern concepts. While the theories advanced by Joseph Lister and Louis Pasteur did not occur until the next decade, vaccination against smallpox was widespread. It wasn't until the 1850s that, despite that, critical review of the available period literature and writings give a much more nuanced look at hygiene, cleanliness, and domestic life. Any analysis of hygiene and cleanliness in Bogota during the mid-19th century must begin by setting aside modern assumptions regarding sanitation and disease. To characterize the city simply as unsanitary risks obscuring the intellectual and cultural frameworks through which its inhabitants understood health. Bogotanos were not indifferent to cleanliness. On the contrary, cleanliness occupied a central place in domestic life, medical discourse, religious practice, and social respectability. What differed fundamentally from modern understandings was not the desire for cleanliness, but rather the definition of cleanliness itself and the mechanisms believed necessary to preserve health. The dominant medical theories of the period attributed enormous importance to the environment. Air quality, ventilation, humidity, odors, bodily constitution, and climatic conditions were widely regarded as decisive factors in the emergence or prevention of disease. Hygiene therefore extended far beyond the removal of visible dirt. It encompassed the regulation of domestic space, the circulation of fresh air, moderation in daily habits, and the maintenance of moral order within the household. The public health circulars issued during the cholera scares of the late 1840s provide an unusually revealing glimpse into these concerns. Municipal authorities repeatedly urged residents to ventilate their homes, reduce overcrowding, eliminate stagnant water, maintain personal cleanliness, and separate domestic animals from living quarters. These recommendations reflected prevailing medical theories, but they also reveal much about the material realities of everyday life. The very need to issue such instructions suggests that many households experienced crowding, poor ventilation, and close proximity between human and animal habitation. One preventive manual expressed these concerns in remarkably direct language: "Do not leave urine and excrement in the bedroom." Although the recommendation may appear self-evident to modern audiences, it provides valuable evidence regarding the practical challenges of daily life. Chamber pots remained a common necessity, waste removal systems were limited, and the management of sanitation depended largely upon household practices rather than municipal infrastructure. The same document emphasized the importance of sunlight, ventilation, and the regular cleaning of living quarters, reflecting widespread confidence in environmental management as a means of preventing disease. The household constituted the principal arena in which health was managed and cleanliness was practiced. In an age when most medical care occurred within the home, the dwelling functioned simultaneously as residence, workplace, nursery, infirmary, and site of moral formation. Consequently, household management assumed a significance extending far beyond practical concerns. This relationship between domestic order and social stability appears with particular clarity in Josefa Acevedo de Gomez's treatise on domestic economy, one of the most illuminating sources for understanding 19th century Colombian household culture. The work was written explicitly for the use of mothers of families, housewives, and girls' schools. That statement alone reveals the degree to which responsibility for household order, health, and discipline was assigned to women. The management of the home was understood not merely as domestic labor, but as a civic and moral responsibility essential to the well-being of family and society. According to Acevedo de Gomez, the day of a respectable woman began early. Bedrooms were to be aired and arranged. Beds were to be made. Furniture was to be dusted and organized. Household accounts required supervision. Servants required oversight. Meals had to be planned and prepared. Children needed instruction and moral guidance. Throughout the text, domestic order appears not merely as a matter of appearance, but as visible evidence of virtue, competence, and social responsibility. Such expectations reveal much about the gendered organization of household life. Among the middle and upper sectors of society, women occupied a central role in the preservation of family health. They supervised food preparation, monitored the well-being of children, maintained standards of cleanliness, and frequently served as the first line of response when illness occurred. Long before a physician arrived, a mother, grandmother, aunt, or household servant was often responsible for caring for the sick. The relationship between cleanliness and social status deserves particular attention. One of the most striking features of 19th century Bogota was the contrast between the relative disorder of public space and the careful regulation of domestic interiors. Streets could be muddy, crowded, and filled with animal traffic, while the interiors of respectable homes were maintained according to rigorous standards of order. Visitors frequently remarked upon the cleanliness of patios, the organization of household furnishings, and the careful management of domestic space. The architecture of Bogota's homes reinforced these distinctions. The interior courtyard, or patio, formed the center of domestic life. More than a simple architectural feature, the patio functioned as a carefully regulated environment situated between the public world of the street and the private spaces of the household. Family members gathered there. Domestic labor was performed there. Water was stored there. Plants and flowers were cultivated there. In many respects, the patio represented a controlled microenvironment through which families attempted to create order within a city whose public spaces often remained difficult to regulate. The management of water constituted another fundamental aspect of domestic hygiene. Bogota lacked a modern municipal water system capable of delivering water directly into most homes. Water was obtained from fountains, streams, and public distribution points. Its collection and transportation required substantial labor. Servants, water carriers, and family members devoted considerable time to obtaining, storing, and utilizing water for drinking, cooking, cleaning, and personal hygiene. These logistical realities shaped patterns of cleanliness in ways that modern observers sometimes misunderstand. Personal hygiene was valued, but its practice occurred within material constraints very different from those of the present day. Frequent laundering of clothing and linens, washing of the face and hands, and the maintenance of orderly living spaces often carried greater practical significance than full-body bathing. The presence of domestic animals further complicated questions of hygiene. Chickens, pigs, pigeons, and other animals frequently occupied space near human habitation, particularly among poorer sectors of society. Public health authorities repeatedly identified such arrangements as potential threats to health and recommended greater separation between living quarters and animal enclosures. These recommendations reveal the extent to which many households functioned as mixed ecological environments in which people, animals, food preparation, and waste disposal existed in close proximity. Cleanliness also possessed a profoundly moral and religious dimension. Throughout 19th century Colombian society, physical order and moral order were frequently understood as mutually reinforcing. Household manuals, devotional literature, and public health publications emphasized discipline, moderation, self-control, and proper conduct. Disorder within the household could be interpreted not simply as a practical problem, but as evidence of deficient character or inadequate supervision. The close relationship between religion and health became especially visible during periods of epidemic disease. Clergy participated in vaccination campaigns, distributed health information, encouraged charitable activity, and provided spiritual care to the sick. The boundaries separating medicine, religion, and public administration were often far more permeable than modern observers might expect. The vaccination circular issued in Bogota in 1847 illustrates this intersection of medicine, religion, and public authority. The Archbishop complained that some individuals rejected vaccination without examination or discernment. The phrase captures a recurring frustration among 19th century reformers, the difficulty of persuading families to adopt preventative medical interventions. It also reminds us that decisions concerning health were often made within households rather than institutions. Parents, clergy, neighbors, traditional healers, and physicians all participated in determining how illness would be understood and treated. Equally revealing is the emphasis contemporary health literature placed upon emotional discipline. One cholera prevention manual repeatedly advised readers, "Do not fear." To modern audiences, such advice may appear psychological rather than medical. Yet many 19th century physicians believed that fear, anxiety, grief, and emotional disturbance weakened the constitution and increased vulnerability to disease. Health was therefore understood not merely as a matter of physical cleanliness, but also of emotional equilibrium and moral self-regulation. Viewed from this perspective, hygiene in 19th century Bogota appears not as a primitive precursor to modern public health, but as a coherent cultural system rooted in the scientific assumptions, material realities, and social values of its time. Although many of its medical explanations would later be displaced by bacteriology, the concerns that animated them, clean water, fresh air, adequate housing, proper nutrition, and the regulation of domestic space, would remain central to public health long after the decline of miasmatic medicine. For our next podcast, we will be discussing the food, cuisine, and diet of Bogotanos in 1840. Once again, we must give thanks to the J. Leon Helguera collection of Colombiana at Vanderbilt University for many of our primary source historical documents. This lecture was narrated by Professor Franklin Buten Soto.